Hello, hello. GM. GM Bapic. GM Chad. All right. It is ultrasound. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah, cool. All right, guys. It's week 5. We are almost there, right? We have week 5, week 6, and week 7, and all we're doing is solidity. So hopefully you guys like solidity. Bootcamp logistics. Today we're doing a few things differently. We're going to do our typical schedule, right? We did coffee, we have intro slides, some questions, demos. They're not that exciting this week, but if anyone wants a demo, definitely come up. We'll jump into week 5 slides with Adrian. And then we're going to have 2 workshops today, actually. So Cloud's going to do a 15-minute workshop on sort of best practices for front-end developers. And this will be really useful as we talk about the final project. And then Toby's going to do a smart contract testing workshop in the conference after the slides. And he'll be talking about Hard Hat and Foundry and best practices for testing smart contracts. That's probably the most important thing you can take out of this course is getting good at testing, right? Again, like working with the EVM, with Ethereum, with smart contracts, you're working in a very volatile environment. Not volatile, but I guess like very risky environment, right? You're dealing with money and people want to take that money. So making sure smart contracts are robust. There's no bugs, there's no ways for reentrancy attacks and exploits is super, super important. And this is something that every employer is going to want you to do well, right? Is test your smart contracts and prove that your smart contracts are bug-free if you can. Okay, so we're on week 5, right? We're saying bye to JavaScript for now. Not entirely, but we've got this new friend in town called Solidity, and hopefully you guys understand the basics now. And today we'll be getting more into those details. We'll be talking about things like mappings and some of the more advanced features of Solidity. I want to bring up the final project. This is going to be week 8 when you look at the AU curriculum. And so they're pretty open-ended with this, but we try to sort of hone in on what we think is the most important thing you guys can do. And that's going to be building a full-stack dApp. So using sort of weeks 1, 2, and 3, your front-end skills, your React skills, to build a front end, and then building a protocol using Solidity to be able to connect your front end to the back end. So if you think of any of these big protocols like Uniswap, for example, there's a front end allowing you to swap tokens, and then there's an entire protocol written in Solidity. So the goal for this is for you guys to team up to 3 in a team and build a front end dApp. Someone can take the front end piece, the back end piece, you guys can all share. But I think working in teams is really important. And this is a skill set that you'll use a lot during hackathons, which is what we advocate for as ETH SD. And so this will be due February 25th, 1 week after week 7. So we end here, I think, the 18th. And then this project will be due 1 week after. It'll be submitted virtually, and we'll ask for you guys to film or record a Loom video, essentially walking through the project, demonstrating it, and then pushing it up to GitHub. And then we'll be releasing the rubric this week, so you guys kind of have an idea of what boxes to check off. For ideas, I want to open up this site. Alliance DAO they're like a Web3 bootcamp / accelerator. And they also post, they update these ideas pretty frequently. These are like startup ideas that they think are cool. And so you can kind of check these out if you need some ideas. It's really, really annoying. What's up? Okay, yeah, for sure. Yeah, maybe. Okay. For you guys watching the live stream, if there's anyone there, there's a bunch of noise in the back, so we're going to take like a 2-minute break until we get that sorted out. But in the meantime, this website's great for getting some ideas in terms of what you guys can build for the final project. There's a ton of cool things here, from gaming to consumer apps, decentralized infrastructure. Some of this stuff isn't totally relevant, out of scope. But if you do need ideas, definitely check out this website. So this is Alliance DAO, and this is their Notion site for crypto ideas.
Comment.
Mr. Toby.
This company reached out to us, and they have an accelerator that you can apply for, which I thought was, I didn't quite know what it was, but we looked through it. It was a pretty lengthy application process, and it seemed like they wanted quality companies or startups or projects even. So in addition to even the ideas, you might want to keep
Yeah.
It seemed like it was well put together, and we Smart Piggies applied for it. I don't know if we'll end up doing it or not, or we'll get accepted, but it's something to keep an eye on if you do want to, like, if you have a good idea or you have a group and you want to, do an accelerator. I looked through the process, and we're going through the process now, and it seemed like a high quality program.
Yeah, that should be fun. Yeah. Yeah, exactly what Toby said. Like they're a Web3 accelerator. They have these cohorts where you can apply if you have an idea. These are for founders that want to build companies. So if you build something really cool here or at a hackathon, you can then take that to Alliance and apply for their cohort, and they'll accelerate you, fund your company, and you're off to the races. They've got a lot of cool resources here. So the one we looked at is startup ideas. They've also got a community, companies that they work with, Web3 jobs, if you guys are in the market, and then also essays. And these are great essays on sort of what's happening in this space. ZK is really popular these days. So they talk about that. And yeah, all around just a great resource. So if you need startup ideas for your final project, head over to alliance.xyz, and then the startup ideas Notion page should help you there. Real quick, does anyone have questions on this final project? We'll release the rubric, but if there's any immediate questions, I'd like to answer them now.
Is it kind of open-ended? Just like make any
Yeah,
that you can think of?
exactly. It'll be open-ended, and we'll have a rubric that kind of creates some guardrails for you guys, just so you know kind of what to the level of scope that we expect, right? But yeah, it's pretty open-ended. So just build a dApp, and then talk about your dApp, what problems it solves, and then make sure you have good testing for your Solidity smart contracts. Make sure your front end renders. There's a good UI UX experience, etc.
What about as far as teams, or is it just solo development? How's that going to be organized?
Yeah. So for this, we think teams of up to 3 make sense, given like the size of the cohort. So you could do this by yourself. You could do this with another person, or you could team up with 3 people. I always advocate to find teams that, it's great to work with people, and that's kind of what you do anyways when you're at hackathons or in a job. So we'll have a team building exercise maybe sometime next week. We can even do that today, or we'll maybe create a channel in Discord. I mean, we can just use existing ones, but yeah, I think teaming up is the best way to go about this. Tobes?
So this is like a narrower set of constraints than what will be on the 8th week of Alchemy universities. But I think, talking with Chad about it, we kind of want to get you into the habit of what you would do in a hackathon, because some of those hackathons lead to a long-term project. Some don't, but some do, and some have. 1inch, I think, is ETH Denver's like, crowning.
Thank you.
Crowning example. But so for the rubric, I think it's going to be something like we're still discussing this, but the things that Cloud outlined with the front end, there'll be a like a contract rubric and like a testing, like unit testing. Make sure like you're hitting all those, because every time you do, or at least in my experience, whenever I've done a hackathon, you're building a dApp. It's like, okay, I have a framework that I need. I need a front end, I need a contract. We've got to deploy that. Make sure it works, and you need to do that in a weekend. They used to be a weekend, now they're like longer, but
Yeah.
it used to be a weekend. So you'd like, Friday night, you'd see all the bounties, and you'd like smash something together, and then Saturday you'd build it, and then Sunday you'd present it. So we kind of want to give you that idea, if you do any hackathons or anything like that, what that process would be. So you kind of have like one of these complete, and then you're familiar with what the expectations are, because we looked at kind of like ETH Global's expectations. Yeah. So it should put you in a pretty good position to do something like this, or at least give you some familiarity when you get into a hackathon. If you want to participate, you're like, okay, I kind of know, like, I'm going to spin up, here's my frameworks I like, here's how I spin things up, here's how we test, and it should put you in a really good position to be comfortable doing that going forward, and that's kind of what our goal is here.
Yeah, exactly what Toby said. We took like the ETH Global sort of like submission rubric, and we essentially like kind of forked it and edited it. And we want this to be like sort of as real of an experience as it would be going to a hackathon, so that when you guys do go to a hackathon, you guys are prepared.
Hello. So are we thinking of like kind of doing like an MVP kind of thing, like just like bare minimum, like can it work, like does it like function and stuff, and then if it's like a viable thing that we can kind of build.
Yeah, we don't expect you to build Uniswap v3 in a week. If you guys do, come see me and I'll fund it. No, but yeah, I mean, MVP, be able to storytell it, try to solve try to bring a solution to an existing problem in the space. That's always cool. Or add some creative flair to something that exists, make it better. But yeah, it's a week, right? So keep that in mind. Cool. Awesome. So today, the 2 workshops that we're having, the first one after the week 5 presentations are going to be a front-end best practices talk. And we got a lot of comments from the Blockchain Explorer project that we didn't really cover React or some of these components or CSS well. So Cloud, who's our front-end guru, right, is going to kind of come up here and do a small talk after the slides, talking about frameworks. And I think he'll be building like a to-do app really quickly and showing how to bootstrap that repository with React or Next and Vite and some other cool tools. And then afterwards, Toby's going to do a smart contract workshop talking about best practices with Hardhat and Foundry. Foundry is another framework, sort of like an integrated development environment for Solidity, and it has a lot of cool features. The first one that's obvious is everything's in Solidity end to end. So with Hardhat, you're writing tests in JavaScript, so you have that abstraction layer, right? You're dealing with things like bignumber.js, which could be annoying, and all the other things that JavaScript has, versus just writing everything in Solidity end to end. So Toby will be talking about Foundry. Foundry also has other cool features like fuzzing and formal verification, which are other ways to test your contracts. Cool. Real quick, week 4 recap, right? We did Solidity syntax, smart contract communication, Hardhat. I'm not going to go over this again, but Adrian's going to dive deeper into week 5 slides. And I think just to recap sort of what we were expecting or what the end goal of this week is that there's a difference between message.sender and TX origin. I think this diagram really shows it well, right? You start with an externally owned address, which can be your MetaMask address. And when you communicate with a smart contract, the message.sender and the TX origin are the same, right? Because they're coming from this EOA. But let's say that your call to contract A makes another call to contract B. You can see that things start changing here, right? So the origin is going to stay the same because whoever created that initial transaction is always going to be an EOA, but there could be a chain of contracts, and so the message.sender will always change across the chain. The TX origin will stay the same. So this was kind of what we were expecting you to understand to kind of solve the week 5 challenge. And hopefully all you guys submitted, so I didn't give away the answer, but that's sort of what we were expecting here. And then in terms of sort of the rubric, so basics, right? Did you explain it in your README? Does your project compile, right? Does your Hardhat execute? Were you able to properly configure the Goerli network, right? This is the network we're using. There's 2 proof-of-stake networks. There's Goerli and Sepolia. We're using Goerli. That's sort of the default. Were you properly configuring your environment variables? Did you leak API keys, your private keys, or are you reading those from an env file using .env? Were you able to utilize getContractAt? I know there was a few questions about this, but it's really, we just wanted you to make sure that you're using sort of Hardhat's functions to actually chat with contracts, right? And so getContractAt expects you to pass in a contract name and an address, and the contract name gets pulled from the actual ABI. That's an artifact that Hardhat produces when you compile contracts. In terms of Solidity, did you include a license and version? You always have to do this, right? This is your Pragma at the top, and then your MIT license on top of that. And did you use a call or an interface to talk to your contract, right? So there's 2 ways you can do this. You can do a raw call, which you can pass in like an ABI.encode signature, or you can define an interface, which makes it a lot easier because that's sort of like, if you will, typing that function. Security. Did you pass in your API key or private key into the environment variable? This is sort of another point from the Hardhat section here. Unit tests, we asked for you to do 2 unit tests. You could have really only done 1, but we wanted to get you practicing how to actually write tests and understanding chai. So how to format a test properly. Are you using before each to instantiate your contract before, and then actually executing your test after that. And then the side quests, right? There was 2 side quests, or I guess small projects within the modules that we asked for you to complete, and these were really based on getting your hands dirty with Hardhat. Any questions on the rubric? Cool, awesome. Any questions about week 4 in general? All right, Solidity whizzes. Bapic?
main one. I think I might cover it if we get to demos and stuff. But like, it was really difficult to come up with a unit test for at least like my contract because it was just like so simple.
Yeah.
And it's just like, how the frick do I even test this? So like, yeah, it was just like I just thought that was like an interesting like kind of thing where because like there's different types of tests where you get like kind of positive kind of like reinforcement tests to make sure it's like taking the right input, but it's also like the negative side of it, like where it's like, can you just throw random crap at it and just like see what happens?
Yep.
But I mean, yeah, it's just kind of like it made me kind of like get some more insight into like unit testing for sure.
Yeah.
So.
How like the idea is like, can you get creative with unit testing, right? Because like you can always test like the obvious things, right? But it starts, I mean, maybe not in this contract, but you start getting into like invariant testing. So what are things that are going to stay the same and you expect to stay the same over time? Toby?
I was just going to say, I know you're already coming, but come to the unit test workshop, and you can see how to test with one function, how to do like 10 tests on it.
Go to the unit test workshop. Okay, I think we don't have that many demos, but I did notice Bapic wanted to demo. So yeah, let's do it. Let's give it up for Bapic. Can we get this thing off? Just rip it off? I like my shirt.
Let's pop up my computer there. That's cool. There we go. I got it. Thank you, man.
Awesome.
Okie dokie. Thank you, sir.
Let's give it up for Chad.
Oh, yeah. Go, Chatty Chad. Okie dokie. I am cool. I think we're kind of working here. So it was really interesting. I was kind of looking at the rubric there, and it was really funny because it said we had to use get contract at, and I don't think I used that. So we'll kind of see that here in a second. But oh yeah, here we go. Bonk. Cool. So yeah, long story short, here's the smart contract. It is agonizingly simple. And yeah, I didn't even try making tests for it. Like I tried, but I kind of gave up after about 5 minutes when I was just like, I don't know how the heck to test this. So I'll probably learn about that in Toby's little workshop there. But it's pretty simple. Basically, we have like just the actual like contract itself, which is just like a function. It'll take in an address into it. So this theoretically could be applicable to any other kind of any other contract besides the Alchemy University one that has like an attempt kind of function on it. So if there's like some other contract there that has that, then it could interface with it with this actual interface function. So I wanted to kind of make it like reapplicable to like other things. So that's more like dynamic and not like more like hard coded and with like contract variables. And then yeah, so we have our magic kind of deploy then run kind of thing here, which I kind of thought it was just easier to kind of deploy it and then run it in the same go. So we have our contract factory where we get the actual like contract itself, and then we deploy it, and then we're going to wait for it to be deployed. And then once it is deployed, then we have like a little link here that comes up, and then we have our winner contract, and this can be like changed. So theoretically, like if you're running in your terminal or something, you could have it as like an input or something like that, but that's like a later thing. And then and then yeah, just like basically it tries to run the function, and if we just get the response, and if we have like a transaction hash that's successful, then it goes through and like kind of goes through. So let's see if it actually works here. I can't even remember. I have to go to my own README here to try and figure out how the heck to do this again. So yeah, I'll run my scripts here. So we're going to be npmi, but I already have everything installed, and I have my env ready, and I won't pull an Adrian with my own envs going up everywhere. So yeah, let's just run the thing here. So run, we're going to go scripts, and then deploy, then run. And then let's just do it on Gurley. Why the heck not, right? I could do it locally, but that's not fun. So
Can you do it locally? Do you have the contract?
I actually don't have the other contract, so I actually wouldn't be able to do it locally. So good point there. So good thing that I'm doing it on Gurley, so it actually works. So it's going to go through here. Hopefully, if my internet works. I think it is working. I did configure it beforehand. There we go. Now attempting. Cool. We got a hash, and we got a success. So let's go and take a look at the transaction. Let's open it. Hopefully nothing weird is on my browser. There we go. And then oh, man. Oh. No. That's, yeah. Anyway, so yeah, we got a success. So we got that. let's go and take a look at the contract here. Ooh, very nice. Because I actually don't know how to get back to the other contract here. Let's just copy it and paste into Etherscan. And then we can go to the events here, and then we can see 28 seconds ago, there was this winner that was emitted. So, woohoo. So yeah. Yes, Toby.
Go back to the transactions on that contract in Etherscan.
Right here, just the transactions right here?
And then how come we should see yours there? Why is it not there? That's 3 days ago.
It emits events. So like the transaction isn't actually
gotcha.
happening on.
So then where's your address?
So basically, this is like here. This is the transaction hash, and then it came from
from-
my contract that I just deployed.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And where's your contract? Let's see it.
So let's.
Did you spit out your contract address?
Huh?
When
What's
you
that?
deploy a new contract, did you deploy your own contract? when
Yes,
you did this?
right then when I
Right.
ran that
Did you
JavaScript function, this
did
one,
you spit it out?
it
Do we know-
deploys it and then it runs it at the same time.
Do we have it? Do we know
the
it?
yeah.
Contract address. of what
Yeah,
it
so this is the transaction address, and then we can just go to the transaction itself, and then we can go to the contract, which is obviously going to be it's from. Oh no, sorry, it's sorry, to.
it should
over
have a
here, yeah.
contract create.
I think it's here, yeah. And then here's my contract, but it doesn't. It just has a bytecode right now, so I could like decompile it.
Perfect.
Go to transactions.
Yeah.
It says contract creation down at the bottom there.
Yeah.
That's your contract right there.
This is my contract where I am now. No. Oh, it's going to no.
That's the transaction that's creating your contract.
You're on it. It's
Oh.
F6635. Great. I just
Cool.
want y'all to see like the event was from you. You know, you can
Yeah.
prove that on a third party that this thing actually worked.
Yeah. So, yeah, I'm still kind of learning, and honestly, kind of Namdar and I were talking too, where it's just like, did this thing actually like work? Because it's like, it seems like it did, but I kind of don't really know what's going on here. So, but yeah, that's that. And then I'll quickly go over some of the other stuff with the side projects. Really simple. This was just like deploy and change state, like kind of the same kind of thing, where it's just like we have like a. Let me just kind of make this smaller here. We have a Solidity smart contract right here. So it's just like X random string, and we just kind of change them with these different functions. Holy moly, this is a different string. And then, yeah, basically, like once we run it, then it just basically kind of updates the variables themselves. It's pretty simple. It just like deploys the contract, and then it just like calls those functions with basically just calling them with no input variables. And so it just automatically changes it to whatever the preset strings are, or and ints here, uints. So yeah, cool.
Oh yeah, good job, Bapic.
Woo. Oh yeah. Awesome.
We're gonna have Sam come up next for a demo.
Ooh, Sammy Sam. Sammy. Okay, let's see. I think I've gotten this down to an art now.
Yeah.
There you go.
Cool. Let me actually, before I plug in.
Yeah, make sure you just.
My browser tabs as well.
And then you got your. All right, cool.
Yeah, like
Very
life
hot.
hack. Very hot mic. I'm gonna actually put it in my pocket because it always like ends up dropping. There we go. The turtlenecks are the best sometimes. Oh yeah, right. It's right there on the beard where it scratches. Okay, let's see here. 1 second. Okay. Good. All right. Can never tell if this is working. Yeah, it's working. Cool. So what I'm going to go ahead and show you is week 4, but I'm not going to run through the actual like running because kind of basically netted out the same results as Bapic. But I'll show you what I did here. Yeah. There we go. Nice and big. Cool. So what I got here, and then I'm just going to do this. Okay, work mode on. Cool. So my contract, very similar as a proxy contract here. I called it proxy, right? But you can see it's basically the exact same thing. You got the interface, calling it attempt, ka-chow. And then this is the actual contract over here that I did write. So this is the interface for the contract. I know I could have probably just imported it, right? That's another thing, but I didn't do that. I think like import winner or whatever the name of the contract actually is. It's called contract. But yeah, very similarly, I wrote a win.ts, which kind of uses an existing deployment because I wrote a deployment script over here. I run this to deploy the contract once, and then this just interacts with the already deployed proxy contract. It passes in the destination contract, which is predefined by the rubric, and just passes that into ka-chow. So we can kind of test that out really quick.
What's
Ka-chow, I don't really know, but it's something.
Is that from Cars?
Yeah, it was from Cars. My fiance showed me Cars the other day. I never watched it, so it was something that stuck. So I was like, I would name it. But yeah, it was his tagline, the Cars tagline, lightning or whatever. And I fell asleep on the movie, so don't ask me any questions about it. All right, so npx. Let's see, what was it? Oh no, I just run node. So you notice it's written in TypeScript. This is kind of valuable. It's this really awesome library called sucrase, which allows you to run TypeScript without compiling it first. It kind of just like cleans out all the type annotation and just runs the JavaScript part. It's a lot faster than like compiling it and then running it and whatnot, transpiling it. So I'm going to run node, pass an -r, which is saying, hey, add this module called sucrase register, which will kind of like hack the import, the module import for node, so it can understand TypeScript files. And I'm going to do win.ts. And that will run my win.ts file in node. And boom, it finished. And let's see here. Let's find the transaction hash here. And let's go over to, I'm going to create a new window. Whoop, new window. Ether. I didn't do all the nice things like the links that you had.
You might have to go to Gurley now.
Yeah, oh, you're right. Let's go to Gurley, run, and then we go to that transaction.
Nice.
And this is it, cool. So I can kind of like continually, ka-chow. So that's that, but what I wanted to really show was something that Bapic mentioned was about testing. And that was something that I really wanted to dig into, so I'm looking forward to your talk, Toby. But I tried my best to like test this out as much as I could. So I did have a little sidebar with Chad during the week to kind of understand, hey, what get contract at? How am I supposed to use that? So originally I wasn't using get contract at, but then after talking with him, I understood what its use case was for. So my proxy tests start with a fixturing the contract that I do have over here, right? So it deploys that, and we wait for that to deploy before anything else, right? And then we set the contract address to a local variable, right? Then once we get to the test, we can just get that contract without redeploying for each test. We can just grab the contract already deployed locally, and then we have access to it. So that was the one I think that I had to do, and I only had one test. So the first test was, does it win at life, right? So that was the first part. So we go, we deploy our proxy contract. I probably should have just done get contract at for our proxy as well, but I think there's a reason why I didn't want to do that. It's because I want a new state. I don't know. So we're just checking that we expect that after running ka-chow that it will emit a event called winner. And this is kind of interesting. Because I'm using TypeScript, I can actually dig into where does this emit thing come from, right? And it looks like there's like some try assertions in the hard hat try matchers library. So I dug into that a little bit, and that was very helpful to like use TypeScript to kind of navigate what kind of helpers do we get in addition to what try comes with by default. It looks like we have like things like reverted with, reverted, etc. And so I went ahead and started doing something else, which is my second test, which is, will it fail if given bogus address, right? So I gave it some dead beef, right? And it rejected with a error that matches invalid address, right? So I just wanted to show that as like, hey, you don't just test the happy path, you can always test like a known unhappy path. So that's something else that I just want to share. So that was my test for that. And yeah. Cool. Any questions? Yeah.
I just want to applaud the use of the TypeScript here. When you make a hard hat project, you have a choice. And it's a little bit more prickly, but if you're choosing the TypeScript version, then it's in the long term, probably better for you.
It's yeah. I will mention this. I'm already using TypeScript every day, and that's probably my familiarity with it. Probably allows me to really want to use it more. But also, once you get familiar with it and use it, it's actually more helpful. In the example I showed, where you can click to a type and dig into almost like not quite the docs, but like the information about the API that you're using without jumping over the browser and looking for the docs. So sometimes it's a quicker way to get grok at what you're working with. And just a case in point of that, where I did struggle even with the types, is on I think my testing project, unit tests. Let's see here, where I did try to do more, bunch more tests, right, on the faucet test one, where I try to like, hey, happy paths, should it deploy correctly? Should it do this and that? I tried to do like, should not allow the, should not allow another signer to withdraw, reverted without a reason. That was cool. I could find out, hey, I just want to check that it reverts, but it doesn't have a reason, right? I wanted to check that. So there's some cool things about like being able to dig in the API that you're using really quickly. But where I really wanted to write a test that I couldn't really figure out, which was getting it to, I can't remember now. There were some struggles I still had with it where I couldn't get the amount out of the API. I wanted to figure out the balance of the contract in the faucet. So I couldn't really do that. That was something I was still struggling with. So there's still like some of it that you can't really get from just looking at the types. You still have to go to documentation and figure out how is this intended to use, but ideally it would be nice if everything's there, right? Everything's in the type, maybe even like some type docs and stuff like that. Anyway, JS docs. But yeah, TypeScript, if you're not trying it, I highly recommend at least trying it and then like, yeah, dipping into it.
Cool.
Cool. All right.
Do you have any other demos, by the way? Does anyone else want to present? Okay, cool. In that case, Adrian, do you want to come up and we'll kick off week 5 slides?
Cool.
Awesome.
Here. I don't know where that goes here.
Are we still good? Yeah. Perfect. All right. Let's get it for Adrian.
How's it going, everyone? Can you guys hear me all right? Yeah? All right, let me plug in here. Let's see if I can figure this out this time.
If you go to your like display settings to see if you can mirror your display rather than like extending it. It's up to you.
Yeah, I think I'll just keep it like this for now. All right, there we go. All right, welcome to week 5. Sorry about that, my voice kind of rough. Welcome to week 5. This week we're going to be looking at advanced data types and events. We're basically continuing on with Solidity, looking at some more advanced topics. Quick little overview. We're going to be looking at advanced data types such as mappings, arrays, structs. We're going to take a look at events. Then we're going to give a little overview about what escrow is. It's kind of related to the weekend project, and that kind of segues into the project that you guys will be completing for week 5. So first things first, we have mappings. Mappings are essentially Solidity's version of a hash table. And if you're unfamiliar with hash tables, they're basically a data type that provide key to value tracking. The way it works is that it takes in a key, it passes it through a hash function, And then that hash function spits out an index or a location in storage where the value that is assigned to the key is stored. And because hash functions are deterministic, every time you pass in the same key, it will always return the same location in storage. And because hash functions are so efficient and quick, they're able to provide very efficient searching, much faster than you could get with something like an array, for instance. And because of this, they're often used for things such as address association, like linking an address to a balance. And so here I have an example where we have a mapping. So the way that you define a mapping is that you use the mapping keyword, then you list the type of the key that you want, then you use an equal sign and a greater than sign to make like a little arrow, and then that's going to point to the type of the value that you want. So in this case, we're linking an address to a Boolean, and it basically defines whether an address is a member inside of this Fight Club contract. So then to add something to a mapping, or to link a key to a value, you basically do it kind of like you would with an array. You use the square brackets, but instead of passing in like an integer index, you're passing in a value that is of type of the key. So here we're passing in a user address that is passed as an argument to the function, and then we're setting the value for that user to be equal to true. So now that member, or that address, is a member. And then to like return whether someone is a member, you just do it like you would with an array, square brackets, pass in the value, or the key, and it returns the value. And then same thing here, we have like setting the Boolean for the user equal to false. You can also make nested mappings, and it can get really complex, but nested mappings are really useful when you have to keep track of multiple relationships or values. So for example, I have a ballot contract here where we have a mapping from an address to another mapping that maps an ID to a vote. And I know that seems really complex, but the way you can picture it is like, imagine I go out to vote on different propositions. I send out a ballot for each one of those propositions. My name is going to be the same on each one of those ballots, but the ID and the vote for each particular ballot is going to be different. So that's kind of how you can think of it. Yeah.
Question. So when they're removed, like, do they disappear, or are they just set to not a member? Like, is their hash removed from the mapping? Or?
No, their hash still exists in the mapping. It's just that the Boolean is now changed to false. Yeah.
False. Okay. So is there a way to change it to remove it from the mapping?
I'm not 100% sure.
So the way that Solidity works is when you make a mapping, it just creates, you just have access to the entire space. So it's not as though the address gets removed from the mapping. The address is always there because it's a key, and it gives you access to the entire key range, right? The way that they handle it is if the value is default at that, the value of a key, it just isn't represented in the trie. So that's how they deal with the storage implications of that. So you always have the key. It's just if it's a default value, the trie won't extend, and it'll be a default value, and then the machine says it's a default value. I don't need to deal with it.
Okay.
Just a quick one. So like this is what tries are in like actual code, right? Is that correct? Because I heard you were talking about a try, and I know we were talking about it, like all of the kind of like theory behind like these data structures for a while. Is this like the practical application of that like data structure?
So when it says when you make a mapping, you can think of it like a very, very large array. But when you have to descend into what the data storage is, you can get some optimization by having default values. So if the machine goes through and it says, oh, this key has a default value, I won't represent it. Like, I'm not going to descend into that data structure. But the mapping itself is like a huge address space of like every possible combination of addresses are represented in a big storage space. It doesn't lay it out because it's too much resource for the machine. It just says you have access to it.
Yeah, so kind of to come back to what I was mentioning with the like ballot example, in this function here where we cast a vote, you can treat it kind of like, I don't know if you guys have messed with like 2D arrays, where you pass in like the first index and then the second index. So here the first argument that you're passing in aligns with the address, the initial key, So that's saying like I'm sending a vote, and then you need to tell it the second key, which is the ID. In this case, it's like what proposition you're voting for, and then you're setting the value equal to the vote for that particular proposition. And then another example of where nested mappings are used are in like the ERC20 token standards to keep track of token approvals. That's one of the features of fungible tokens, where you can approve other users to spend a particular amount of your tokens. So you can kind of imagine how you could have a nested mapping where your address leads to another mapping of other people's addresses and the amounts that they're allowed to spend. So now we're going to start talking about arrays. And I kind of split this up into two different slides. One where I'm talking about arrays in storage and arrays in memory, because they act a little bit differently. Storage arrays are often defined as like state variables, like this members array here. And kind of to talk a little bit more generally, an array is an example of a reference type, meaning that it holds a pointer to the address of the data's location rather than the actual data itself. And so in Solidity, arrays can be of either a fixed or dynamic size. And when you create a storage array, Solidity actually includes the .length member and the .push and .pop methods. .length returns the length of the array, push appends a new item to the end of the array, and pop removes the latest item in the array, kind of like a stack frame. So here, for example, we defined the type of the array and then use little square brackets to define that it is an array. You give it a name. You can also add a visibility if you want. And then here in this add member function, we push the new address into the array. And then here in this function, we remove the latest member using pop. And you can see how, like in this instance, it would probably be better to use a mapping, because when you're using an array, the only thing you can really remove is like the latest member. So you can start to see like the difference between the use cases for the different reference types. And actually, like arrays are kind of, you don't really use them as much in Solidity, but yeah, there are cases where you will have to utilize them. So now when you create an array in memory, it's a little bit more tricky, because memory arrays are not able to be resized once they are initialized. So if you want to initialize a dynamic memory array, you have to use the new keyword and then pass in like a value that you want for the size. So here, for instance, we define a state variable x that is set to 5. And then we initialize a dynamic memory array using the new keyword. And then we pass in like the x value in parentheses here to define that the array is of size 5. Now, if we were to change x later on, when someone calls the create array function, it would give an array of a different size than if it was 5, like in this instance. So you can kind of see how it's dynamic, but it's not in the sense of like the storage arrays where it's just like you can resize it using push and pop. And that kind of ties into this next point, where memory arrays do not have access to .push and .pop, because those methods actually resize the array. And like I mentioned, memory arrays are not able to be resized. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about array anti-patterns, which are like kind of practices that you want to keep in mind when you're using arrays. So iterating through arrays in non-view functions can be really costly, because you're looping through each item individually and modifying it. So if you do want to loop through an array, there are some good practices that you can follow, such as iterating by chunks and using some gas-reducing techniques, such as incrementing your iterator in an unchecked block, like I have in this example here. And this is just like a standard for loop where you're looping through an array. And if you're curious as to what an unchecked block is, so whenever you perform an operation in Solidity, Solidity checks it over for things like integer overflow and other like small things like that. And if you put something in an unchecked block, it basically doesn't check for those things, and it is cheaper than running it like in a normal block. So, and then another thing I wanted to talk about is that when using for loops, you have to be aware of specifying a concrete bound, because if you don't, it leads to an unbounded for loop, which can lead to program failure. So for example, if you have an array that stores a list of addresses that are whitelisted, but you don't set a limit for how many addresses can be added to that whitelist, and you have a for loop that runs through that, eventually it's going to get so big that it's going to be so expensive that users aren't going to be able to use it.
You guys are so lucky. Okay, this is a subtle point, but Adrian had brought up a couple things in this example that are really great. So we haven't got to gas golfing yet or anything like that as far as how this machine is built and the constraints. We've kind of touched on it a little bit, but we'll get into it later, and it's not that important now. But look at this shape of the for loop. It's quite different from what we would find in like a traditional programming language like C or even JavaScript. You know, you'd throw up that incrementer up in the declaration.
Mm-hmm.
But because we're so sensitive to resources here, there's a couple like little tricks, and these are only tricks that the compiler, these are like, you're really using how the compiler works to make these tricks. But an unchecked incrementer has less operations on it, so it's cheaper, right? So I can make this even cheaper than this, but that's kind of like more advanced topics of like, how can we limit the amount of operations? The other thing are unrestricted for loops are basically like a no-no. Can't do those, because if you did have a big token list of even, what if it's not even whitelist? What if you're just like voting or something and you're keeping track of everybody who's voting, and that's an unbounded array, and then halfway through you run out of gas when you try and like calculate a vote or pay out, if you're doing payouts or anything like that. So you could actually kind of like brick your contract. You know, the contract still works, but you could actually like have invalid logic that would happen after it gets so large, because everything is counted off of these gas calculations per opcode. So there's a lot of subtle things that are happening here. And it's a great example of not only this idea of minimizing your operations, but also this anti-pattern of creating a logical structure that you wouldn't otherwise be able to access in this particular machine that we're working on. So it's a really great example.
Yeah, if you wanted to, you could even write your for loop in assembly, like to optimize it even more. But that's like kind of complex. So now we're going to take a look at structs, which are user-defined data types that can hold their own member variables. They're really similar to like classes in JavaScript and the other languages, and they're often used for things like record keeping and bundling data. So here, for example, we define a struct using the struct keyword and then the name of the struct. Typically, when you define a struct, you title it with like a capital letter. I don't know what that type of like titling is called, or naming is called. Yeah, but so you define the name of it, and then inside you defined its member variables. So here, for instance, the vote has a choice, and then the choice is an enumerable variable defined up top. And then it also has an address, which is the voter. So when you want to create a struct, you use the name of the struct, and then you pass in the parameters for the member variables. And then to actually retrieve items within the struct, I forgot to add that here in this code block, but you use a period, and then the name of the member variable that you're searching for. So like, for example, say we made a vote that was called vote1, and we wanted to access the voter, we could call return vote1.voter, and then it would return back that member variable. So this is one thing I wanted to touch on that is mentioned in week 5 modules, but a question I'd like to pose is like, what if you have a function that returns a struct, but the struct you're searching for doesn't exist? One thing you can do is create a default struct to fall back on, and then later use that default struct as a safety check once the search concludes. So you can imagine here that we have a function findVote that searches through like an array of votes, trying to find a vote linked to an address. But imagine that it's not able to find one. In that case, we created this default vote that is of choices 0, which is like the first choice in enums, for example. And we set the address equal to address 0 because no one can access that address, so it's just like a default address. And so after the search concludes, we can check to see if it was successful by making sure that the voter is not equal to address 0, and then also verifying that the voter is equal to the address that we passed in. So that's just like a neat little trick you can use to sort of like do a safety check when you're searching for like a struct, whether a struct exists. So next we're going to go on to the next really important topic, which is events. And events provide logging functionality within Solidity and the Ethereum blockchain. And information emitted from events is stored in the transaction receipt trie of a block rather than the smart contract storage. Now, events can contain up to 3 index topics. And topics are basically special event parameters which can be used to filter and search for a particular event. And depending on the number of topics you include, the EVM uses the opcodes log0 through log4. And the reason that it goes up to log4 is because the first topic is reserved for the hash of the event itself. And I actually I was also looking into the use of log0, and I was kind of hoping that Toby, I don't know if you could touch on log0 a little bit more, because I'm kind of unfamiliar with that opcode and its uses, so I don't know if you had like something to mention about that one.
Specifically, like what log0 is reserved for? Because you don't have access to it, right? We can't do anything with log0.
Yeah, because I know in the modules it kind of mentioned that it's useful for testing and debugging, but I don't know.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Well, so this is weird. So when you like events are how you kind of like watch contracts.
Mm-hmm.
So when you want to do anything like when you want to interact with a contract, you can call the functions on the contract. But if you want to do anything based off of what that contract does, you usually watch the events. So anything that emits off of that contract. When you do that, though, you can kind of I don't know if this is going to answer your question, so you let me know. You can emit these events with a name, and that gets reserved in log0. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, that's just the first index point of the log, and that's how you would just track these things. But you don't get access to that. So log0 through 4. I guess I don't know if I can go into that. I know what the index topics are, and then the data payload that comes with it. But I don't think that's your question exactly. It's like how you would use those 4 to do debugging and things like that?
Yeah, I'd assume it's like making sure, you could use it to like make sure that the correct event is being emitted, or like that it includes the topics.
Typically when you test for that though, you would dump the event, and then you check everything in the event. The event hash, any index topics, and then the data. Sorry, Chase is giving me some shade. Oh, behind me? It's only 2 people behind me. Uh-oh. You guys are doing it wrong. So it might just be a handy way to do testing, like grab log0, grab log1, grab log2, and that would be the hashed name and then the indexed fields. So maybe it's just an easier way to access those. But typically when I do the testing, you like grab, like you know they're coming out, and you grab them and you say, this should be this, this should be this, this should be this. But maybe we should look it up, and then next week we can look into it. Okay, great. Yeah, great question.
So this is kind of an example of defining an event and also emitting that same event. So we have a contract here called hi, and we define an event called said hi, and we pass in a topic called the greeter. You know it's a topic because we added the indexed keyword, and then we also have a count uint that keeps track of how many times a particular address has said count, or has said hi. So the count isn't an index or a topic in this sense, because it can't be used to filter and search for the event once it's emitted, but it is still included in the event as data. So then I define a mapping that leads from an address to a uint that keeps track of the count. And then inside of this function, the say hi function, we increase the count linked to the message.sender, and then we emit the said hi event, passing in the message.sender as the greeter, and the hi count at, this should say message.sender, not address. And then the hi count as the count in the event. So this is basically how you would define an event and then emit it, like in a function, for instance.
So you said the second, the second argument
Of the event should be message sender.
Yeah, this right.
Oh, in there.
Yeah,
Oh, gotcha.
yeah.
Gotcha.
So now this is kind of like what Toby was talking about, where the functionality of events is that you want other applications to be able to listen to the data that is being sent out from your smart contracts. So one of the ways you can do this is using ethers.js. Ethers.js actually provides a .on method for listening to contract events and then performing some sort of action once that condition is met, or once the event is emitted. And under the hood, the .on method actually uses the lower level ETH getLogs method from the JSON RPC, but it actually goes a step further and like filters out the correct logs that you're looking for. Because if you just used the ETH getLogs on your own, you would have to manually go in and filter and search for the event that you want. So now I'm going to give a little bit of an introduction to escrow, which is like a concept that you guys are going to be using for the final project. And it's also a really common concept that pops up a lot with smart contracts, just because smart contracts are so like well built for escrows. So an escrow is basically an arrangement in which a third party temporarily holds funds or resources until a condition has been met. So there's a little diagram I included here. So so you can imagine that the buyer and seller want to exchange money for a car, but they don't trust each other. In this case, what the buyer could do is send their funds to a third party, and for just to preface, the buyer and seller are both trusting this escrow agent to be trustworthy. So the first thing that happens is the person that's buying the car sends the funds to the escrow agent. Then the seller sends the car to the buyer. Once the escrow agent and the buyer verify that the car is in shape, everything's right, then the escrow agent releases the funds to the seller. But as you know, there's always the chance of human error. So if something were to go wrong, if the escrow agent were to act in bad faith, for instance, then the buyer or seller could still lose out. And this is where smart contracts come into play, because they basically replace the role of the escrow agent and use logic to release the funds once a condition is met. So yeah. And then so for the weekend project, you guys are going to be building a decentralized escrow application. And then I included a bunch of the CSS preprocessors and frameworks that Cloud included in one of the previous slides, just because it's kind of another front-end heavy project. I know you guys are kind of tired of front-end by this point, but yeah, that's basically it. I don't know if you guys have any questions for week 5. Yeah.
For this week's project being a decentralized escrow, is there any topic of like what is being escrowed, or is that kind of open-ended?
I think, well, it kind of gives you like a basic layout to start off with. I can take a look right here. Give me 1 second.
A lot of times with these escrow projects, it's like, hey, we can do this cool thing. Like, we'll release funds when these conditions are met. And you're like, cool. And then you're like, well, how do you make sure that the conditions are met? Yeah. And that becomes a problem. So it might just be like a layout of how do you set up this logic in a smart contract to, there's there's two parties, and then there's a third party, but the third party is this this code and not like a attorney or something. And then how do you go through the logic of one person engages and then the other person engages, and then you confirm that, and then you release. It's kind of like that kind of, I would imagine, because you can't do it any other way. But the question always is, well, how do I know that I received the car? Or how do I know that the car is okay? Or how do I know that once I receive the car that I want to, release the money to you? It's like that. Those are the...
I gotcha. Is it good to get into multi-sig at all or anything like that, or no?
I know that multi-sig is in, I can't remember, well, it must be in 6.
It's in the later
yeah,
weeks,
because I ran into that one. It's like multi-sigs, and then you get into governance, so.
Yeah, so funnily enough, this weekend project actually doesn't, when you're performing an escrow, there's like 3 different roles. There's like the arbiter, the buyer, and the seller. So usually, like I mentioned in this slide, ideally the arbiter would be a smart contract. But for this weekend project, you're actually defining an arbiter to be like an EOA. So you're going to use you have to like connect to the contract as the arbiter and approve transactions in that way, like releasing the funds from between the buyer and the seller. And it provides like a basic UI for you to do that. But the challenge is mainly for you to like customize it and add different things. So yeah.
And just a quick one, just coming back to structs, could those be kind of like apparent, like, are those similar to objects?
Yeah,
you could say, yeah? Like they're kind of like the same thing.
Yeah, they're similar in the sense that in the way that you like define them and then retrieve values from them, but classes deal with like inheritance and stuff like that, and structs don't really like have those sort of features. They're kind of like a bare bones version of classes. Yeah.
Cool. Awesome. Awesome. So before we get into the front end workshop, which I think is actually a great transition since some of this week's work is front end, I want to mention a couple things about events, right? Events are the only way that the Ethereum blockchain can talk to other things, right, happening in the world. So if you think about like Oracle services like Chainlink, you can't make an API call out of Ethereum, right? You can't access the internet from a blockchain, but you can send out events that other services can consume and sort of send data back to Ethereum. And so the only way that Ethereum or blockchains can talk to the outside world is through events. So they're super, super important. Also, another use case for events are bridges, right? If you talk about like cross-chain or anything like that, right? If you're bridging from Ethereum to Polygon, you're using events to actually send messages over. Events are your communication layer between blockchains. So super important.
So, sorry, I just kind of wanted to comment on that real quick. Sorry, I'll be really quick. Would events be being used in like layer 2 products usually? Like kind of like how you kind of have like those roll-ups and stuff. Is that how that kind of happens?
If there's bridges, then yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, for sure.
I was just gonna clarify. You said that events are a way that a blockchain talks to other services. I would say that no blockchains talk to anything. That was my joke.
Yeah.
Remember? So events are just basically contracts spew out events, and then from the outside you can look in and do things. But there's no communication happening. In bridges and things like that, there's no communication. It's like you do something on one side, and then you're watching, and then you do something on the other side, and you're watching. It's all. There's no communication, which is unfortunate because we assume with our great like web development technologies that we've built over the past like 50, 60 years that everything talks to everything else. In blockchains, it doesn't. It's just like, I only know what's in here, and I don't talk to anybody. I'm introverted.
Yeah.
But I do things that I can watch from the outside.
Definitely. So it gets more into like event-driven programming. And smart contracts will set themselves up, right, to be able to take in sort of requests from other things. So if you think about a contract, the way that it sends out updates is through events, but it can also have methods that outside services can call into, right? So like, for example, Chainlink will receive an event that is a request, right? And then Chainlink can then use that request to send data back into the contract, and the contract has to implement sort of Chainlink's, function to be able to receive data back. So that's kind of how you can have Oracle services and external, oracles.
Hello. Okay. Yeah, do events increase like the attack surface for contracts, or is it kind of more, since you're just looking at things, it doesn't really introduce a risk?
I wouldn't say so, because it's just emitting data, right? If there's a way that if they expose, everything's open source first of all, right? So events are just sending data out, right, to whoever's listening to them. Toby?
There is a way you can attack this.
Oh boy.
So think about, we don't really get into this, and like I said, it's an adversarial environment, but you could think of a way, or there was a way in which you have to think about when the event is emitted and when you're changing state. And those are typically different. You can either change the state and then emit an event, or you can emit an event and then change the state. If you have some kind of reentrancy attack, you could say, oh, I'm going to emit this event, it happened, and then I'm going to change the state. When you change the state, though, you go and re-enter. So you haven't changed the state of the contract yet, and you went back around and you've called the function again. You would have said, I did something. You would have emitted an event. So if you have something tracking that saying, oh, this event happened, and you re-enter that before you're changing the state, you could, if you're watching it, you could think, oh, I just emitted 5 of these transfers, but I didn't really change the state. I didn't change the state 5 times. So in thinking about this, it's not very likely because, as Chad said, you're just emitting data. But if there's something critical that is watching that to do other things, where you emit the event could be rather important. And this is more like long ago you could do reentrancy with send and things like this, and they've kind of like cleaned up the environment so you can't do that kind of thing. But it is something to think about. It's like as soon as you say emit event, that means it's happening. I mean, this is a deterministic atomic machine, so this is all happening like in a block. But as far as the execution goes, if you're doing something like that and something is watching, it could be the case that you've emitted 5 events and only made 1 transaction.
Yeah, and like to that point, right? I mean, it's not necessarily an attack vector. It's just you're giving more information that can be used as an attack. So events themselves don't present any attack vectors. You're just giving more and more information to things that could potentially attack your contract. We can definitely go into this later. I wanted to mention that point. And with that said, I want to bring Cloud up to talk about front end. So let's give it up for Cloud. And then after James will do a quick 1 to 2 minute little speech, and then we'll take a break and we can get into the fun stuff.
Fun fact, with the newest Solidity update, mappings parameters can now be named.
Yeah, 18.
Yeah. So that's fun. So the parameters, okay. So I don't want to talk in my, can you hear me? Yeah. All right. Yeah, so the parameters traditionally, like what you guys saw, he's just passing in the type, right? Address, bool. You can now name those. So you can say this address represents a user. It represents, you can say, you can name the Boolean, you can name the uint, right? Before you just had to pass in uint and you'd name the actual mapping, be like balance of, but now you can be like balance of ETH, right? So it's like more like an index signature TypeScript kind of like? Yeah. If you guys, I can just show it to you super quick if you want to see it. But
Surprised it took them so long to do that.
And then also, while I'm getting this up and fixing this, for those of you who were,
version 0, man.
for those of you who were super interested in kind of like Ethereum and what was possible in terms of like attacks and things like that, definitely look into Ethernauts. So right? So we have, oh, maybe it's not here. Let's, oh, did it? Was it?
No way. Yeah, I just saw that. Did they self-destruct?
So let's go here. This is ours. Really great guy. Anyway, so this is like traditionally what you guys see, right? There's no naming here. We just have address, uint, 256, cool, whatever. But now we can do something like this, right? Amount, owner, amount, ID. We can name these things now. So, yay, awesome, cool thing.
Does that have any functionality, or is it just more of a self-documenting?
Just self-documenting, right?
I did see one. I was thinking the same thing, like, how do we use that? I did see one example of, like, for owners, you can actually, like, if we want to, like, maybe pull it up later, there was one example of, like, how that's useful. But we've been dealing with, mappings that don't have any naming, so we're all used to, like,
Yeah.
I never need to name that thing.
But you can name them now. I always thought when I first started learning about mappings, they were like super confusing to me because like I got arrays and like I got objects, key value pairs, but I was like, what the hell does this represent? Anyway, so you guys see a lot in the curriculum, a lot of front end stuff, right? It's constantly kind of being talked about. the state of becoming a Solidity developer, right? In truth, I like to look at Solidity as this fence between the front end and the back end, right? Kind of traditional programming roles that we have that we've always seen. So here's the stats from, this is the 2021 survey, so this represents the 2021 year. The 2022 one is coming out Q1 of this year, but as you can see, this was directly from Solidity. This was the survey last year. Majority of people using Solidity are programming in another language, right? Because in truth, unless you're like super freelance type of developer, companies aren't looking solely for a Solidity developer, right? You need some type of skill around the Solidity, okay? So whether that be front end, whether that be back end, right? Maybe if you want to do web dev, JavaScript, kind of that stack, or you're going to go learn Go, Rust, right? These things are going to help you become a better developer, right? This is going to get you more looks as a job. That's not to say there are not roles for Solidity developers. There are strictly smart contract roles. Certain jobs have them, right? Like DeFi protocols need straight up Solidity developers, things like that. But I would say for the majority of it, you need something supporting your Solidity skills. So this was the most popular languages of 2023 from the Stack Overflow, right? As you can see, Rust, number one. Everybody wants to learn Rust right now. Then we have TypeScript, and then, you know, Python, Kotlin, Go. And you know, you don't even see JavaScript till down here. So to be truthful, a lot of you guys have learned JavaScript. Yeah, that's bad. Not really bad, but you're not going to use it in a production application, mainly just because TypeScript is going to catch so many of your errors. It's going to catch so many of your shortcomings as a developer that your next level up needs to be learning TypeScript as well. If you're interested in the front end. If you're interested in the back end, you know, there's different technologies for that, but I'm going to be speaking about front end. So
at work, doing serverless, I'm running Node every day. So in the back end, we're still doing TypeScript too.
Okay, yep, so there you go. Even on the back end, you know, Node.js is also a platform. Here is the 2022 survey from the State of JS. State of JS is awesome. They always do survey as JavaScript developers. You know, please participate. Oh, yep. Yeah. So, do you have a question? I'm sorry.
No, I was just saying, like, I've taken the.
Oh,
I've taken this before.
yeah.
It's really great. I've been playing this for a couple of years. It's really good.
So, popular things right now in the environment, Svelte. This is the new and trendy thing. Yeah, it's always new and trendy.
I don't see it on there, but solid.js probably going to be even more of the coming. It's got to be there somewhere.
Oh, maybe.
I haven't looked into it. Solid.js.
Well, this is pretty much my point, and that's great that he brings it up. As a web developer on the front end, right, everybody thinks back end can be super complicated, but realize as a front end developer, you need knowledge of everything, right? And then you not only do you need knowledge of all of these, you know, you need exposure to these, but then the trends change so fast, right? So when you're coming into web development, you have to deal with the fact that this landscape changes a lot more than the back-end landscape, right? Back-end technologies have been pretty stable. What has been used is still being used to this day. When you come into front end, you're going to be learning a different freaking library all the time. So Svelte, Next.js, and then we even got Vite, right? These are kind of like the popular things going on right now. Vite, I 100% don't know how to say it. It's one of the two, but I think it's Vite. And so, you know, kind of get used to that kind of flow of like, you know, being exposed to all of these frameworks, being exposed to all of these libraries. That is part of being a web developer, especially on the front end portion. So today what we're gonna really go through is Next.js. It's my particular favorite. But you know, all of these have their strengths at what they do, right? Vite's super nice, really quick, bundles up applications fast, and it's a great replacement for Create React app, which brings me to this was suggested to React recently to replace Create React app. If you're using Create React app, I'm gonna be honest with you, don't, right? It's pretty well known for the front-end development, like we don't use Create React app. You need to use something else, right? So this was the official thing, and then we even had David come in and he gave 5 different options that you could go for not using Create React app. But what was interesting to me was it's pretty much been depreciated, right? We've got 140K downloads on NPM weekly, right? Nobody's using it. Why? Because it's just too heavy, it's too slow, it doesn't work in production, right? You're gonna be sitting there waiting for things to build for far, far too long. So get away from the Create React app, pick up something like Next, pick up something like Vite, right? These are all options for you to kind of move forward and be a better developer. Now it's great to learn with React and get those fundamentals, right? But when you're building something that, you know, could be for production, maybe you're in a position right now that you could pick the technologies for your company or for it to be scalable in the future. Let's move away from CRA, right, and learn something.
Just a quick one. What's the main differences between Next and Vite?
So Next is going to have a lot of server-side rendering, SEO optimization, routing kind of built in, right? So we're going to go over all those things. So the server-side rendering is going to help with SEO because all of these components can be rendered on the server, which means that things can go and parse this information before it's even deployed on the client. Vite is going to be a bundler that just packs up a whole bunch of different frameworks. So with Vite, you can use Vue, you can use React, you can use, but the main part is that it's a lot faster with its bundling time. It also comes with support for things like post-processors, right? So if you want to use Tailwind with React, you got to go through a bunch of steps. If you want to use some of these other things, you got to go through a bunch of steps. With Vite, all of this stuff is kind of baked in. It also comes with SWC, which is a Rust-based compiler, and that's, you know, TurboPack and SWC are also the new trendy things going on. Web dev is all about the trends. I'm not gonna lie to you. You know, you'll learn something this year, the next year is gonna be a new trend. It's just part of the truth, right? When I first started, maybe like right before COVID, it wasn't Tailwind, it was Bootstrap. Now it's Tailwind, right? So then you had to go learn Tailwind, and I'm sure next year it'll be something different. So Tailwind's dope. One of the things that when we start getting into building this, and I'm gonna build this very naturally, like so you can just see the process. It's not just gonna come all straight from my memory, but we are gonna build like a quick little CRUD app. Feel free to code along if you want or not, just watch. Tailwind, as you can see, I know a lot of you guys kind of wanted to stay away from CSS and SCSS or post CSS, whatever it is. I still think it's really good to have those fundamentals down for CSS so you know what you're doing, right? Because you can use Tailwind, but you're gonna be super limited if you don't have good CSS skills to basically just using what they give you, right? So you won't be able to create these kind of custom sites the way that you would want. But with all of that and kind of understanding why we are getting pushed so much for this front end part, right? So you can make these pixel perfect designs, you can make these beautiful things. We can go ahead and start working on this little app. So this is where we're gonna start with pump it up. Got you. We're gonna make this full screen in a second anyway, but right now we're gonna go ahead, we're gonna get our Yarn app up and running. So create next, create next app. All right, so we'll create this next app, call it CRUD for now. We're gonna do this with TypeScript. Does everybody know what a linter is? Pretty much it's gonna catch your bugs. Oh yeah, it's gonna read your code and catch your bugs before you do. It's gonna give you a bunch of warnings and say, hey bro, that's bad. Never ignore your linter. Some of the warnings you can ignore, but let's just not.
Main differences between NPM and Yarn.
So, yeah, number one thing is you don't have to write run or install, right? No, I'm just kidding. But that's what a lot of people tell you. That's what they use Yarn for, right? It's just less words. Yarn has workspaces. They got a bunch of different ways that it just works with permissions, efficiency, however you want to do it. I like Yarn because it makes me feel good, right? And sometimes that's all that matters, okay? So this is all gonna be based off Next 13. So if you are looking to go back and use Next after this, first of all, this is experimental. So we're getting experimental, baby, all right? We're using TurboPack, we're using Next 13. None of it's solidified. Beta documentation. So when you go look this up, make sure you look at the beta docs. Don't just look at the normal docs if you wanna continue with this. Cool, so we're gonna get this up. We're also gonna be using Pocket Base for our backend, which is great, right? It's small, it's lightweight. You don't gotta fight with it.
What is Pocket Base?
It's a server database, just like similar to Firebase, but you know, it's trendy.
Does it run
Yeah.
Docker or something?
Yep, yep, yep. So we're going to put it straight into our, we're done with you.
Excuse me,
I got your excuse.
is it similar to
Express?
Express?
No. Express is like is a part of writing servers with Node.js. This you'll see. This is gonna come with like a whole UI and everything like that. But like we're not even gonna use Express. We're not gonna use Node. So typically, right? So not everything here is gonna be the absolute best practices today, right? Because like we were talking about before, when you're making API calls with your client, you typically want to use a proxy. So that's beautiful that Next.js kind of actually gives you that functionality. And we're going to go through and we're going to delete pretty much all of this, right? So we'll make a new file. And with Next.js, with 13, the best way to name your files, right, is page. This is kind of their standard, right? So you don't want to give this an individual name. And so also the other thing is when you're building your directories, make sure that you're building your directories with scalability in mind, right? There's a bunch of different ways to build directories. And React has like a bunch of like how you want to build your directories. You can build your directory with components. You can build your directory with another directory called just styles with all your styles in there. You can build it with each style attached to each component. How you want to do it is up to you. Think about what it's going to be like if you have 100 different style sheets, right? If you have 100 different style sheets in one directory just called styles, filled with styles, you might, your team's going to be quite upset. They're going to be looking through a bunch of things. Number one thing not to do, that global CSS file or your index CSS file, right, whatever it's named, do not put all of your styles in there. You're now polluting the global scope of the entire CSS. So if I come in here and I name a class div whatever, right, I can't go and reuse that class anywhere else. It's always going to style all the divs like that. But if I make a module, if I componentize this, then I can use it anywhere. So we're going to start with this. We're going to start with this first one.
Can you increase the font a little bit?
Yeah. We're going to start with this first function, which is just going to be a normal function. Now, out of the base, what happens here is that we're going to get we get just straight up server components, right? So these are not client-based components. You can't use any state in a Next 13 server component. If we wanted this to be a client component, then we would have to name it, right? So let's actually go and spin this up. Sorry, let's go into CRUD. Let's actually go into our package.json, and we'll use this -- turbo flag. This will allow us to use turbo pack. And we'll come here and we'll say yarn dev. Let's spin this up. It says, hey, thank you so much for using us. All right, and we're on a home page. Yarn dev. So as you can see, I didn't make this layout file. This layout file is going to be given to you straight up by Next. I even deleted it. So once you start it, it's going to give you this. Your layout file for every level of your directory will be shown on all of those pages, right? So we can come here. We have our children, which is pretty much just going to be all of the things that's within this directory named like page.tsx. So we can come here, we can make a nav bar, and we can just say, make this an unordered list, make this, and I'm gonna go a little fast just to save time, so my apologies. And we're gonna import link from Next. Right, and this will allow us to go through. And the beautiful thing about how this kind of works in terms of Next is all of our routes, instead of having a router, they are determined by our file structure, right? So out the gate, it's going to give us a file structure. So if I make this href to this, right, and I say, you know, notes, I come here and I make a notes folder, and then here I do a file called page.tsx, and we make another one. And we go here, right? So that's going to be on every page, right? And I don't need to, when we click this, right, it's going to take us to the notes page, right? This is all without using anything like a React router. All of this is going to be set up from your, essentially your file directory, your file structure. Great, cool. So we're going to actually go through this using, one more time? Yep. Everybody can see? Okay. So we'll just say home.module.css. And what this does now, right, this allows us to essentially create a component, right? You can think about it as a component of styles, right? So the reason that I think it's important to not start with Tailwind is if you don't understand at what point you should be making an abstraction versus a one-off feature, you're gonna really quickly pollute your pages because they're essentially gonna have so many different styles on them, right? And that's just kind of what you wanna avoid. You don't want to have a page where it's just like 50,000 class names, so you kind of have to understand when that. So this is in our global CSS, and we're gonna make a style super quick for our nav bar. So our nav bar here, right, it's got an unordered list in it. So right now, if I was to say display flex on this list, right, nothing's gonna happen. Even though flex automatically takes your style and it turns it into a row. The reason it's not gonna happen is because there's an unordered list wrapper on that. So it's targeting that unordered list. If I put two lists in there, they would be side by side. So what we need to do is target this UL. Or actually, we don't even have to do that. What we can do is get rid of this UL, right? If we update. Oh, actually, nope. You know why? Because these are wrappers for the links. Or actually, let's just see if we're even in there. Okay, so we're not even updating. Let's do this. And again, experimental, so you may come into some problems. And let's see why we're not getting anything here. Alrighty. That's fine.
Your CSS, I was getting a bug on my end, like the CSS wasn't assigning.
Yeah, you know, it's not doing what it's supposed to do. We're gonna figure out why here in a second. Let's see.
Can you check the inspector, see if that's showing up?
Yeah, it didn't show any issues. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna go here and just see if we're updating at all. And so because this is a module, right, we need to do class name, then we need to do styles. Actually, we need to do import styles from here, right? And this is only because we're doing it with a module that you have to do it this way. And we can just say test. Let's see. Okay, so we're there. Just our global CSS is not working. So root A. Sorry, I can barely see in this. Let's see why. And so this is like if I had something that was broken and I wanted to just work on it, this is exactly how I do it. Say display flex. Okay. So we can target it, but our global file seems to be kind of wonky here. So let's see if it's even imported. That's probably why. Import global.css. Globals. Thank you, Greg. All right, cool. All right. So now we're at least targeting it.
Do you have to explicitly import the global?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, if I hadn't deleted it, it would have done it for us in the first place. But I had deleted it, and I need to get rid of a bunch of this. So let's see. We don't want any of this. All right, there we go. Okay, we'll just say height, 100 view height, width, 100 view width. Sometimes when you start making your projects, right, you kind of want to just target and say make the largest container 100 view height, view width. That way all your divs kind of work the way you want them to. Now we can come here, we can say display flex. All right, we're gonna get that. Let's go ahead and just say list style none, right? Let's make this width 100% of the screen. And then we can just say gap 1M, right? That'll give us some space up there. And we can see that we're on this page. Now, a lot of the times when you're building things, two things. Can I use it, right? Can you even use this? A lot of things can be experimental. So like if we take a look at, this very bad website, right? But we're gonna look at it anyway, right? Not this one, right? Here we have an animated border that's going around the screen. This couldn't be used anywhere other than Google Chrome. So if you try to use this feature anywhere else, it's not gonna show up. If you look up this website on Safari, it's not gonna be there. So it's very good to make sure that when you're writing your CSS, check to make sure it's something that you can use on all browsers. That's also the beauty of post processors. They're gonna add, if you've ever seen like WebKit or Mozilla or like those type of styles, they're gonna go ahead and add that in for you, which is nice. So now that we have our nav bar, we can go ahead and also get rid of this because we don't want that. We can just go in here. We can make another div, call it the home page. And whenever you're truthfully styling something, right? One, you want to make good names, right? And you also want to be consistent. So I use camel case. There's BEM, right? Which is another way of naming your CSS classes. That's a convention. But you just want to be like descriptive, right? So I noticed that when some of you guys are trying to use flex, you're targeting your divs wrong. This is the container, right? When I put flex on this container, it's going to target everything inside of that container. Every time I nest that container, it's going to give me a new layout. So you can use grid, you can use whatever. I'm going to go with flex. And then typically when you style things, you want to think about everything from a mobile first way, right? To be responsive. So truthfully, you would come in here. We're not doing that today, right? And this is where you start designing your page from this layout. And then you work up. You add media queries upwards, right? That's the best way to go about it. And that's how you always want to create your responsive designs. Just so when you're moving forward, because I'm not going to do it that way, I wanted to tell you. So we can add display flex to this. And because I want this to be centered, we can say here, and then we can say here. Both of these are going to center along the X and the Y axis. And the reason that that's not smack in the middle of the page is because this doesn't have 100% height of its container. Right? Divs are only going to take up as much space as you tell them to. So now anything that's placed, any components placed inside of here, they'll take up the necessary space. Okay, cool. So now we're at home, now we have notes. That's a separate page, so it would have to be styled. But this is our home page, cool, we click here, we can go to notes, right? All of this is done through our directories, nothing is done through routers. So let's go ahead and now spin up our server. And you can use, you know, whatever you're familiar with. Doesn't have to be this. Let's actually put it in here. But I like this, you know, you can run it, bam, you're gonna get an admin UI. You can sign up with whatever. Don't steal my account. Cool, so now that we have this, we can go say new collection, right? We'll name this notes. Each one of these fields is gonna be a different field of data that can be input. And I'm not gonna get too deep into like what these things are, but yeah. We're just gonna name this one, no, we don't need ID. We can say note, or we can just say info, done, and title, right? Now that we can go to our notes, we can go to our collection, we can create a new record. And the first one we can just say, you know, and we can create another one called like crypto. We can just say Bitcoin, cool. And we'll just create a third because why not? Crypto and Ethereum. All right, so now we'll have 3 of these. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna go to our notes page, and because this is a server component, what's actually super cool is we can use, we can just go ahead and change this to just straight up be an asynchronous function in the component, something you can't do with React. So that's super cool. What's the issue here? Oh, yeah. We have to tell. All right. So we're gonna make another one called const get notes. It's also gonna be asynchronous. And this is just gonna call out. I'm just gonna use the normal fetch library, but you could use whatever. You could use Axios, you could use whatever makes you really happy to kind of get this. And here we go. Gonna go grab all this. Get rid of this, get rid of this, get rid of this. And we can say await, fetch. And you guys have kind of already been doing this kind of stuff. You know, as we've been playing around lately.
Open parentheses at the beginning. After fetch.
Awesome, thank you. And then we just want to go ahead. This is, that question mark is something that's from, I'll show you here. That question mark is from TypeScript. And essentially what it means is, hey, if this doesn't exist, that's okay. We don't need it, right? Also, it's really bad to kind of use any, but we're going to use it today. Because, yeah. What's wrong here? What's the issue?
You're missing the await.
Oh, yeah.
Res.json. Equal await. Yeah, there you go.
Yeah.
And it needs to be an invocation of the JSON.
Yep. There we go. Cool. Awesome. Thank you, guys. So now that we can come here, we can go ahead and we can get our note. All right, we can get multiple notes. And then right below, we can make a function that's essentially going to just be like a component. You would make this into a component. We'll just call it note. I'm actually just going to copy and paste it from here because I already did this. And we can go over it if I can do it. Okay. No, we don't need this. No, that's fine. And then we want to import link from next link. And yeah, this is get notes. And we'll also go ahead and copy this as well. Why? Because it's easier and we're running out of time. Yeah, we don't have any classes yet. Export default function, notes page.
Oh, you already got export default there.
Oh, I see. Oh, so we don't need it down here. Cool. So we don't need it there. So now we should be seeing some notes on our page, hopefully. Let's see. Home, notes, nothing. Let's see. Nope. Nope, they just don't like me. Oh.
Made a comma before that?
Yep. Show me my notes. No?
Should that be page 0 in the query string?
No, it should be page 1.
Okay.
What we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and restart the app. Oh, the fields are different. So this we named info, and we named title. And this will be title, info, and we can actually still bring created in. Cool. Show it to me. Note.key, let's see, notes, await get notes, cool. Notes, we map over them, pass them here.
Do you want to add a console log to get notes, just to make sure it's getting something?
Log notes, let's see.
Go to home and then go back, because it could be running on the server side.
Doesn't like me right now. Dun, dun, dun.
Does it have an ID, Cloud?
Yeah.
No, okay.
Note is equal to note, map over the notes. We can actually get rid of this though. Oh, you know what? What did we name? No, we named nodes.
What with the invoking of that function, the actual notes themselves? You can check the network tab. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking.
Let's see.
You're on the route.
No, that's the one for the page. Let's see what's going on here. No, we have this function. Let's see versus you. Spawn with node any function, we're calling it. This data, create node. Yeah, we have the cache no store. So what this does is just,
It's different though. It's no store and you have no cache. I don't know if that makes any difference.
No store, no cache.
oh, you're right.
9.
Live demo, live demo.
It's okay. It's,
The first request, just to see if it's even being run.
yeah, it's not gonna. Let's see if we get this data. We're in here.
I actually was going to say res rather than data.
We can see
One
it.
more step up. Wow.
So yeah, it's not getting invocated. So that gets.
So every time you refresh, this is actually running server side,
Yeah.
and that we're maybe not seeing the logs because of when you refresh, you're actually acquiring the server. This is running
Oh.
server side being rehydrated.
Yeah.
locally. So I'm almost wondering if that's why we're not seeing some logs. So if you maybe click home and then click note locally. No, that's
No,
is there anything
it's
in your console log as far as filters?
no.
Okay.
Let's see. If this doesn't work, we'll spin up the other app if this doesn't work. Let's see. All right, let's do this. Spin up the other one. Okay. Well, it wants to work here, but it doesn't want to work over there. Oh well. Okay. We'll walk through the code for this one then. So essentially what we have, what I think is important here moving forward is, yeah, we called for this, right? And our directory kind of shows us the routes. Our directory shows us the routes, right? So this notes folder that we have here is the most important thing. Now, the next thing that Next.js kind of lets us do is create this, like a slug, if you're familiar with that. But this now can be anything. So when we go here to our notes, and we're looking inside here,
You just put something in the file there, bottom.
right? We have this ID here. This ID is going to be passed down to our ID page, and we can pull it out with params, right?
It's like props.
Yeah, just like props, but it works for the route. So instead of being explicit with the route or using a router, we can just pass it straight down. Then we can fetch that, and then when we click one of these, bam, we get just that note, right? So it allows for like ease of access. I kind of really like it. We can also use these loading and error pages, right? To allow us to have more functionality. So load between pages, or if we have an error, you kind of won't see it here because this loads pretty fast, right? But if this was slower to load, you would see loading pop up, right? So you kind of get that ease. You don't have to build a lot. It's literally just one function. Now, where things start to get different is if we want to use a client component, right? Say we need some state. With Next 13, we have to explicitly state it as the client. So we have to come here and say, hey, this is the client, or this is a client component, and we want to use it in that way. And then we can start to use things, start to use state. And it's kind of an interesting way to build because you start to realize how little that you actually need to, one, use state when you're being explicit, right? So like this input bar does need state. This form down here to create new notes. Right? It needs to know about state. It needs to be a client component, but nothing else on this page is. Everything else here is a server component. It's rendered, created on the server, and shown to the user, right? So that's super nice. The other things that I want to show here is that we have these modules, and each one of these different components, right? So rather than polluting one giant CSS app, CSS file, I'm going through and I'm creating, a module directly for this to target just that component. This just helps with your workflow if you're working on teams, and it's going to scale better, right? It's kind of hard to look through a giant CSS file, a bunch of styles.
In terms of some of the like class targeting and stuff inside those modules, do you ever get like an instance where some of the class names are clashing within different components, or does it not even apply to the external scope of that module itself?
No, so if that module, wherever I'm importing that styles from, so say I have this here, import styles from notes, as long as I don't use this import anywhere else, I can name everything the same. So I can put 10 main containers in each different module, and they'll all be the same.
So it fixes that too, because like that was one of the hard ones. Like one of the hard things about like kind of like the other blockchain kind of viewer block explorer project is that like there's so many class names. It's like how do we even name these things anymore? Because it's like the same stuff. So that's nice that it kind of like solves that problem.
Yeah, you can be as redundant as you want then with your naming. So like for a lot of things, I'll typically just say like main container for the top div. Some other tricks that I think that everybody could benefit from, right? When you're creating components, sometimes you don't need to wrap it in a div. You can just wrap it in these
Fragments, right?
Yep, these super blank fragments, right? This is going to give you better like options with your styling because I saw that some of you would wrap something in a div. Then when you imported that component to your app page, you wrap that in a div, right? So now your responsiveness and your displays, right, they're all out of whack because you're like, well, it looked like this here, but then once you place it inside of another div, it starts to act different, right? So every time you add display flex to something, you're immediately targeting that container, right? So a lot of the times what I like to tell people when they're building with their CSS is try to use display flex on as little things as possible when you first start because you'll start to see how little you need it. You just need it on your parents, right? You only need it to be on that level. And then the last thing that I think is good for everybody just to see is we'll do it on this homepage, is a little bit about TypeScript, right? So let's say we want to take a number of type number and set it equal to 0, right? We won't get any issues here, right? Or even if I just say right? But if I come here and I say let number, right? We should get some issues. Basically with it telling me, hey, you can't do that. Or maybe not.
Are you importing that? Oh, I mean, yeah, it's like the page.
Oh,
Oh, that's why, yeah.
right.
Yeah, you're reassigning it.
should show you on your screen here. But this is going to say type string is not assignable to type number. Typically, when you break something like this, it shouldn't even render. So I know like with React it won't, so that's kind of interesting. But I mean, typically you're not going to write something like this. But we can use union operators, right, to kind of get rid of that. Right? Now, you typically want to be as strict as possible. There's very rare times where you need a number and you need a string. The other thing is you can make types, right? So you can say type add, right? Just going to return a number. Right? And then let's say I made a function add. Yep. But if I just had these in here, x and y, turn x plus y, we can then add this here. As type add. These explicitly, so it's yelling at me basically saying these explicitly of type any, right?
So you have to specify each input variable?
You only have to be as redundant as you want, right? So like some things it will know. But yeah, you can be explicit.
With
yeah.
that statement where your cursor is right now, is that are you assigning that add function to the add type to your add function?
Yes.
So basically, you can specify the types of input, and you can that like arrow function number. Is that the output?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is what it returns, right? So if I then wanted this to return a string, right, it would get upset.
Nice.
Even though
Return
it's not.
string.
Is it because you need to invoke that?
Probably.
I think he did. I think after the function add and open brackets.
No.
No, like a call to function added.
Oh, I see. Maybe not.
Yeah.
Yeah, there we go.
So then the last kind of little piece, other than just like your general addings, is when you're making something like a class, right? You need to make these things. You can make it as a type, but most people make it as an interface. So if we were going to say name, we would define string. And then if we wanted to say like height, we could say, or I think age is probably better. We can say number, right? And then we can come here. We can make, you can even just make an object. Const person is equal to object of type person. And then we could say name cloud, age 3000, right? And then you won't get any errors. But if I came here and I just, somebody gave me a string for an input, right? It's gonna yell at me. So like TypeScript just catches a lot of your functions, a lot of your issues before they can happen. So like whatever data you're getting back, whatever bugs could come from incorrect data, or like if somebody's writing something that's like really verbose and complex, sometimes you don't know what you're getting in. So we can use TypeScript to basically help other developers see what type of data is gonna be coming in, right? We know it's gonna be
I don't know how many dApps y'all have made, but as soon as you try and pass a Ethereum balance into JavaScript, it will explode on you all over the place. TypeScript's really great because if you're trying to do one, the numbers will blow up the JavaScript integers, but also you have to cast those usually to strings. You're dealing with strings or numbers. What am I dealing with? TypeScript's really nice because you're like, oh, I'm passing a number here. This really should be a string. That is one of the points of like dealing with Ethereum where you would feel it the most is the balance, because the balances are huge.
Yeah. Also, TypeScript isn't actually machine readable. So everything you write here does get turned into JavaScript, right? So somewhere, right, this tsconfig file you can describe what type of JavaScript you want to work with, from what part, right? Because TypeScript is only for the developer. The machine is still going to turn this into JavaScript, which then turns it in, you know, we go all the way down the line. So that's just good things to remember. The last part that I want to show everybody, right? So we kind of go over Next.js, the reasonings for that, how routing works with Next.js, and then the difference between a server and a client component, and then a little bit more on responsive design, which is using display flex or grid, and just being aware of where your containers are. Here we do have Tailwind, and I know a lot of people are kind of like excited to use this, and it is kind of the new thing, and I think going forward you'll be able to use it. When you go through Tailwind at first, it's gonna be kind of like, the class styling of these isn't the same. It's not very traditional. So it's good to pretty much just have this open, and every time you need to see something, go look for what it does. And it's really nice because Tailwind is gonna give you like just standard sizes, so it's gonna help everything look really, really good. And their documentation is really, really well fleshed out. But there's a lot of different options, right? So like all of these things do something different. And so this is again why I say it's kind of good to understand, because, you know, if you don't understand how rims work, if you don't understand how EMs work, where it's basing these original styles off of, this can get confusing. But I think overall, after using it for a little bit longer, I definitely recommend it, and I think it's good just because you're gonna get like some pretty good consistency across your application. Whereas if you're writing custom CSS, it's easy to just make things look good for that component, right? But not be consistent, using all different types of styles, different type of layouts, different types of measurements, right? You might use percents in one place and rims in the next, and as your style sheets grow larger, it just becomes more and more of a mess. So definitely dive into Tailwind. I would just read through the original, you know, this first part of the documentation of getting started, everything they have to say, and then just after that, just when you need a specific style, just type it in and look for it. So unless there's any questions, that's all I have to show. All right.
Okay, all right. So I'm not going to be long. I just want to say a couple quick reminders to everybody here. And I'm not going to tell you anything that you don't already know, but I just feel obligated to reinforce this every single week that we're here. I want you to remember all of the resources that you have available to you as you're going through this course, right? Because everybody learns at a different pace. Everybody has their own learning style. I was really happy to see more conversations happening on Discord this past week, so thank you for those of you that jumped in there. I don't want you to put something on there to make me happy. I don't care. It's not for me personally. It's honestly to help all of you. And the one thing that I've learned, not only in this Discord, but in other courses that I teach, is whatever question that you are wrestling with, and I don't care if it is a super difficult question or that might sound like the most stupid question in the entire world, I would encourage you to just ask it on Discord, because I guarantee you somebody else in this room has that same question. Or they've had it in the past and they can answer it for you on Discord, or you can sort it out together. The other thing is, you know, this is the first time that we're running this program, and I'm really happy that we're able to be flexible and shift with the needs as we see them come up as we go through the weeks. Like, we just had a little demo here that we probably wouldn't have thought about 3 weeks ago, which is great. I'm excited to attend your workshop after I shut up. But remember, not only the ETH SD Discord, which is, you know, it should be your primary resource to go to, but remember the Alchemy University Discord as well. I was taking the train here this morning, and I didn't have a chance to click through on the link, but I think Al, who was here last week speaking, is doing or has already recorded another front-end demo on YouTube. And so it's all relevant stuff to what you guys are learning as you go through this course. So just ask each other, ask us mentors, check on Discord, and if none of us know, we know somebody who can, or we can point you to a resource. Now, one thing that can get a little bit overwhelming is too many resources, because there's only so many hours in the day, and we don't want to send you down super stupid deep rabbit holes where you get stuck. We want to provide you with relevant information in the context where it's going to help you the best. And I guess the last thing is, I love coming here on Saturdays, because even though, even if I don't say anything, and even if nobody asks me personally an individual question, I love hearing the questions that you guys are asking, because it helps me understand that you're not only understanding the concepts, but maybe where you're having some difficulties, or where we as the mentor team can help push you through a little bit more. And I guess the last thing is, even if you're behind, like, I don't know your lives, maybe you didn't submit the last assignment, maybe you haven't submitted the last 2 assignments. I don't care, right? The whole point of being here is for you guys to learn together and to learn something at the end of this whole thing, right? I mean, personally, right? I was here last Saturday. Life absolutely happens. Last Saturday, I was here for the first hour, and my next door neighbor, who is a single female, brand new to San Diego person, had a medical emergency. So I jumped out of here and I went to help her. I ended up spending the entire day at the hospital. She's fine